Welcome to Real Estate School. Today, we are going to discuss a very important concept that you need to know and understand to pass your state's real estate licensing exam. Dual agency. In a real estate transaction, it's most common to have two separate brokerages that represent both sides of a real estate transaction. That could be buyer and seller, but it could also be landlord and tenant. This helps avoid a conflict of interest that can happen if one agent represents both sides of a transaction. Single agent transactions can make for a more flawless transaction and can create a more even playing field for both sides. Dual agency occurs when a single real estate agent for their brokerage represents two principals in the same transaction. This arrangement is beneficial to the agency because they receive a percentage of both sides of the transaction depending on state laws and practices. Here's an example. A real estate broker is the agent for the owner of a townhome. A prospective buyer comes into the broker's office and asks him to represent her in the search for a condominium on a golf course. After several weeks of activity, including 3 offers unsuccessfully negotiated by the broker, the prospective buyer decides that she would like to make an offer on the townhome that she's seen on the broker's website. She tells the broker that she would like to make an offer and asks advice on a likely price range. Suddenly, 2 cases of single agency just became dual agency. What could go wrong? Well, dual agency requires equal loyalty to 2 different principals at the same time, a high burden that means neither principal has the full, undivided loyalty of the agent. The challenge is to fulfill the fiduciary obligations to one principal without compromising the interests of the other. While practical methods of ensuring fairness and equal representation may exist, it should be noted that a dual agent can never fully represent either party's interest because the duty of undivided loyalty cannot be shown to both principals at the same time. In addition, it is almost impossible to maintain both confidentiality and full disclosure to parties whose interests are in opposition. Because of the risks involved in dual agency, ranging from conflicts of interest to outright abuse of trust, the practice is illegal in some states. In those states where dual agency is permitted, all parties must consent to the arrangement, usually, and always preferably, in writing. So let's recap. First, the agent must inform both the buyer and seller in writing, and both parties will have to agree that this one agent can represent both parties' interests. Next, the agent's required to treat both the buyer and the seller with fairness and honesty. The real estate agent also must provide full disclosure regarding the property and its material conditions. The agent cannot reveal any confidential or personal information of either party involved, and the agent has to look out for the best interest of both parties involved. When it's time to make an offer, the agent cannot offer advice on the amount of money to offer or the amount of money to accept. In short, it is impossible for the agent to perform his fiduciary responsibility of loyalty. The agent is not allowed to protect the interests of one party over the interest of the other party. Although a conflict of interest still exists, disclosure is intended to minimize the risk for the broker. The disclosure alerts the principals that they might have to assume greater responsibility for protecting their interests than they would if they had independent representation. We've talked a lot about disclosing dual agency. Let's talk about a situation no real estate agent should be involved in: undisclosed dual agency. Undisclosed dual agency is a dual agency relationship that is not disclosed and agreed to in writing. If this situation occurs, the agent has breached his or her fiduciary responsibilities to the client. A broker may not intend to create a dual agency. It might occur unintentionally or inadvertently. Sometimes the cause is carelessness. Other times, the sales associate does not fully understand the fiduciary responsibilities of agency. Some sales associates lose sight of other responsibilities when they focus intensely on bringing buyers and sellers together. For instance, a sales associate representing the seller might suggest to a buyer that the seller will accept an offer that's in the buyer's best interest. Giving a buyer any specific advice on how much to offer can lead the buyer to believe that the sales associate represents the buyer's interest and is acting as the buyer's advocate. Any of these actions can create an implied agency with the buyer and violate the duties of loyalty and confidentiality to the principal seller. Because neither party has been informed of the situation and given the opportunity to seek separate representation, the interests of both are jeopardized. This undisclosed dual agency violates licensing laws. It can result in the rescission of a sales contract, forfeiture of a commission, a lawsuit for damages, and possible license problems. Now, let's talk a bit about designated agency, which is a form of dual agency. As we said, dual agency arises when a single real estate agent represents both buyer and seller, or landlord and tenant, in the same real estate transaction. On the other hand, designated agency, also called assigned agency or appointed agency, occurs when a buyer and a seller are represented by two agents at the same brokerage. Remember that the listing agreement and the purchase contracts are signed with the broker, not the agents working under the broker. The agents aren't really the ones being hired, the broker is. Although the clients may never meet the broker, the real estate agents are working on behalf of the broker, who gets paid the commission. The broker, in turn, shares the commission with the agent or agents who completed the transaction. The broker's name is listed on both the seller and the buyer side, thereby creating a dual agency. Of course, disclosure of the designated agency status of the sales associate to both parties is required, as is the consent of both parties to the arrangement. Designated agency is a very common practice in the real estate industry. It's a bit complex, but it's a great way to represent both buyers and sellers in-house. In closing, as a real estate licensee, you will, of course, always want to keep yourself out of trouble by clearly outlining your role as well as your brokerage's role so that your clients always feel they are fairly represented. Well, we hope you've enjoyed our video here on dual agency and have learned a few things that's going to help you on your real estate licensing exam. We have many more videos coming out in the near future, so subscribe below and hit that bell so we can notify you. Thank you.